George Kirkpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. As many of you know, over the last few months, we've learned of a miscarriage of justice. Anthony Broadwater served a 16-year sentence, I believe, for a crime he did not commit, a crime of rape against noted and celebrated author Alice Sebold. A series of events eventually led to the exoneration of Anthony Broadwater, but not before he did time for a crime he never committed. Well, Syracuse.com and reporters Doug Dowty and Tim Knaus did a really long and investigative piece about exactly what happened and how it ended up that Anthony Broadwater served time for a crime that he didn't commit. Something that Black folk in America certainly are very familiar with, as the justice system failed Anthony Broadwater in this case. Doug Dowty, so glad to see you. And first of all, thank you for your reporting on this, and take us back to the beginning of what happened for people that aren't aware of this story, and I guess the happy ending, so to speak. I'm going to say so to speak because Anthony Broadwater still had to do time for this. So take us back to the beginning and what actually happened.
Yeah, George. So 40 years ago, a man named Anthony Broadwater had just gotten out of the Marines, was coming back to Syracuse to take care of his ailing father, and he finds himself accused of rape by a SU student, Alice Sebold, put into a lineup where she can't identify him, in fact, identifies somebody else as her rapist, yet still is put to trial, convicted after trial, sent to state prison, spend time in Attica and Sing Sing and Auburn, watched a friend get murdered in prison, and then leave prison and come back home with the stigma as a registered sex offender. And that stigma lasted until the summer of 2021, when Alice Sebold's memoir, she went on to become a famous writer, and her memoir about the series of events was slated to become a movie. And they were hoping to send it into Netflix, some of these other outlets. And one of the producers on that found the story suspicious and got curious. And that led to some lawyers in Syracuse getting involved.
So wait a minute. After all of his attempts, it was a Hollywood producer that started an investigation?
Yes, sir. It took Alice Sebold's fame and a movie producer to get justice for Mr. Broadwater. And that's one of those racial components to this story. And let me get to the conclusion of this, which is then 3 days before Thanksgiving, in a Syracuse courtroom, with the consent of prosecutors, notably DA Bill Fitzpatrick, Mr. Broadwater was finally exonerated for something that he didn't do 40 years ago.
When you look in your reporting, again, I really advise people to get a look at this story. I mean, you were one of the only witnesses in the courtroom. Syracuse.com was, and it obviously the story went viral, picked up in the Times, et cetera. And you write and that there were, even the grand jury transcript was problematic, and yet there was still a conviction.
Yeah, George, Tim and I went back and this, as you mentioned, this is a story that made the New York Times, top of the fold. It made the Washington Post. I mean, they did their stories and they were, sentimental and showed the injustice, but we went back to try to assess blame and to hold people responsible for what happened. And as part of that, we were able to review those grand jury minutes that you mentioned from the time. And perhaps nobody else in this story more clearly saw the injustice that was going to happen than one of the grand jurors, who 3 times questioned the prosecutor doesn't the lineup have to be accurate? Doesn't the person she picks out in the lineup have to be the perpetrator to continue this case? And the prosecutor demurred, kind of obfuscated, and eventually didn't give an answer, and Mr. Broadwater was indicted.
And let's make it clear, she never identified him in the lineup. I mean, that's bottom line. She never identified him. She picked the other guy, and prosecutors sort of, they were like, well, okay, well, sometimes, just reading exactly what you said in the transcript, the prosecutor sort of said, well, that's didn't really deal with that question, because like you said, he asked that 3 times. And it just goes to show you. So, and it's not just that incident, right? There were other things that you found out. What was some of the other missteps that led to Anthony Broadwater's conviction, and they shouldn't have?
Well, let's start right at the beginning. Within 12 hours or so of Ms. Sebold reporting this rape, and this was very clearly a rape. We can start there. Everybody agrees on that.
Right.
And
she was raped by somebody.
She is raped by somebody. And somehow, for some reason, I don't know, and why, she was not believed. And not only is that an injustice toward her, but that put the kibosh on a police investigation for 5 months.
Right. And let me just add in my expertise from the Vera House. Certainly understandable at that time, in that this is why there's the movement to start by believing survivors, because they often were not believed, or they were blamed for being someplace. And so when I read that because I don't want to take you, because you're going to say something about what that officer said, that she was not believed, right? She was not,
absolutely,
even though she was bruised and she had very evident scars, the officer said witness not credible.
That's right. That's right. Even a doctor testified at trial. There is no question that this happened. And what happened? There's also no question that the police stopped investigating it almost immediately. And what did that mean? That meant that 5 months later, when Alice Sebold points to a Black man on Marshall Street, who happens to be Anthony Broadwater, just out of the Marines, and says, he's my rapist, that police didn't have anything to corroborate that or to exclude him. That all of a sudden it went from, we don't believe Alice Sebold, to, we got the guy, let's get him. And that transformation was just unbelievable. And then, of course, the train started going down the tracks, and it just kept going faster and faster. And by the lineup happened, and 4 hours later the grand jury happened, and now they have an indictment, and now they're in court, and this is what happened.
And you write in your story that Anthony Broadwater cooperated fully, took a lie detector test, gave samples, and his family felt like he was going to get railroaded, right? I mean, they warned him that even though he was innocent and he was fully cooperating, they said, we think you're going to get railroaded. And it turns out that they were right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then compounding all of this, and perhaps just the most overtly sort of racial component, is the appellate court saying, well, the 2 Black men did look alike. I mean, that was their decision. It was 177 odd words. And their conclusion was, it's okay she got the lineup wrong because the 2 Black men looked alike.
Here we go. The oldest racial trope and stereotype that you can imagine, right? And so I know that Alice Sebold, it was very interesting because I read her apology as if she didn't contribute to his conviction. In other words, she said, something to the effect that he was a victim of the system. No, he was a victim of your words, although she was also a victim. So I don't know. Doug, go ahead. Tell me more about what you uncovered.
Well, I was just gonna say that absolutely her misidentification caused this. At the same time, the system cannot allow the victim of a rape to be the one who controls justice
Mhm.
and presumed innocence
That's right.
and proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That anyone in her position, which I can't imagine,
Right.
would yeah would want justice, and
As
maybe justice at all costs, and that might be
right.
a reasonable place to be.
Well, and that's the rub, right? Because we believe that survivors get justice. Most survivors of sexual assault never get the justice that they deserve, but you just can't pick any black man off the street
Mhm.
to serve as a surrogate for the person that raped you.
That's
That
right.
I mean that's so when you put all of this together, I want to get to how, despite his attempts at appealing and trying to prove his innocence all these years, and he's been out obviously of prison trying to do this, how did the producer get get them to do something that nobody else was able to do?
He knew how to find lawyers, and he knew how to uh, raise money to pay for those lawyers,
Hmm.
and he found lawyers who believed in Anthony, and um, had a good relationship with the district attorney's office, got the ear of the DA early on, and to his credit, he listened, and it took a just a miraculous set of circumstances that no one else would really get. Like, you can't replicate this set of circumstances.
What was the other key factor was the use of, he gave a hair sample,
Yeah.
and talk about that.
Okay. So in 1981, there was some thought that you could tell who somebody was by their hair. In in fact, you can only tell basically what their heritage is to some crude level. Whether they come from Europe, from continental Asia, or from Africa, their heritage. So all that can actually tell you, we know, is that the perpetrator's ancestors at some point came from Africa. But beyond that, it's absolutely useless. In 1981, the judge clearly found it very convincing evidence. And that was not something that he had to do. We found out that during trial, the police said it's consistent with Anthony Broadwater's hair, but I can't say it's his hair. And
Right.
somehow the judge said it was.
So, Doug, there was also the decision by the defense attorney, Steve Paquette, I believe, not to go for a jury trial. Judge Gorman was the judge, not elected, appointed, was out of town, and so it was his sole judgment, right? That ended up um, sealing the deal.
Absolutely. And he was convinced that Mr. Broadwater was guilty, to the point that at the end you have summations or closing arguments. Prosecutor goes last. Prosecutor Bill Mastine hadn't sat down on his chair yet before Judge Gorman said guilty.
Mm. Answer me this: how? So this paying for the lawyers. So now they feel like this evidence, this the junk science as they call it around the use of uh, hair. Doug, tell me how it actually ends up in the DA's office now to provide for the exoneration. How does it end up back here?
So, you're referring to after the lawyers get involved?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, the lawyers read the trial transcript from the first time around. This is an 8-hour trial over 2 days to determine a forcible rape case.
Mm-hmm.
These trials should last a week.
Okay.
This one lasted 8 hours over 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
I read the transcript in an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
These lawyers read it and said this was wrong. Now, what are we going to do about it? And they reached out to the DA's office and actually worked together with the DA's office in this case to bring it before a judge who happens to be Gordon Cuffey, who's sort of the lineage from Gorman's seat in the judiciary now belongs to a black man, Judge Cuffey, who has a long and distinguished career, but began in a rough neighborhood in Brooklyn, came to SU, came back because he loved the community, and has had a long career here. And he was the one who it was only 11 minutes, but he's the one who got to preside over that hearing that exonerated Mr. Broadwater.
In full disclosure, Doug, I know Judge Cuffey very well. I didn't want to say, I know him. We actually went to school together, undergrad at Syracuse. And actually we were in school at the time of this incident. And I don't remember anything about it at the time, believe it or not, because I was in Syracuse at that time. So I second all of the things you said about him. But what from your reporting, Doug, what is your takeaway from all of this and the injustice for Anthony Broadwater? What do we take from it? Alice Sebold, she's apologized. Anthony Broadwater, is now, and we'll probably try to get him on to get his thoughts about this later on sometime. But what's your takeaway from all of this with your reporting and going through this? Because, we're in a time when we had the George Floyd issue. And so police community misidentification, not that that's what happened with George Floyd, but I'm just saying this idea of justice for Black folk in the system, certainly we're still, 50 years later, we're still dealing with this, or 40 years later. So what have you taken away from your reporting on this?
Well, we spoke to Professor Paula Johnson at Syracuse University, who advises the court system on these types of issues, how the court system and criminal justice system affect people of color. And what she said that really struck me, and this is in our story near the end, is just how people are preconditioned to believe they understand whose life has value, whose life doesn't have value, who's prone to being a victim, who's prone to being a criminal, who should be believed, who should not be believed. I think all of those issues, that implicit bias came into play here. I mean, there are an astounding number of bad calls from smart people, beginning from the police, an investigator who was a decorated officer, very well regarded, Judge Gorman, another well-respected judge, the prosecutor at the time who was seeking justice for Alice. She went on to become a judge herself and a clerk. Appellate court judges, one of them, her name is on the building for the appellate court in Rochester now. You just had, the amount of wisdom of all of these folk, and none of them could see the injustice that happened here, except for that one grand juror. That's astounding to me.
Yeah. Well, Doug Dowty, thank you for your reporting. You and your colleague, Tim Canals, really read this story and understand, this is Black History Month, and the fact that we're still trying to bring justice for folk in the criminal justice system. And our own case right here in Syracuse shows us that we have a long way to go. Doug, anything else you want to say about this case?
I would just ask you, sir, what stood out to you about this and all of these myriad issues we've been talking about? What one really drove home for you?
Yeah, Doug, just the idea that someone would have to pay for a criminal justice system that does not value Black lives. I mean, I think this is the epitome of saying that Black lives matter. People want to understand what this issue is. This is a case that certainly puts that under the microscope, because if you think about it, we just find any Black man off the street and he'll do, you know what I mean? And so there's that to me is what stands out for me. If I understood your question.
Yeah, no, that's true. And it's that thought. I mean, who should have to say in a news story that not any black man will do. It has to be the perpetrator of the crime. The fact that that has to be said in a story is sad.
Amen, my brother. Doug, first time we've met before, but
Yes, sir.
first time you've been on the show. We really
Absolutely.
appreciate you coming in to talk about your reporting. Great reporting on this story. Very, very good. What was the date it was published? I can have the link for people to find it.
Sure. Yep. We posted this story on, well,
I got it right here, actually.
let's see. I've already, it's already escaping me here. I want to say January 18th.
January 18th. Okay. We got it for you. Well, just look it up. It'll come up. it'll and maybe you'll get to read it for free. Well, I'm a subscriber, so I'll see it all the time. But maybe you get.
Oh, we want people to. We want everybody to be able to read this one. Anybody can read this.
Okay, there you go. Doug Dowty, good reporting. Say hi to all the folks over there, and Tim, good reporting on this. Thank you for the work you did on this. We need more of it, and thank you for being an inspiration for the nation.
I appreciate it. Take care.